And in this very room, we gather as a collective body under God. And in that collection, we all have the power to connect with each other and heal each other. And in that, we need each other. I need you. You need me. We're all a part of God's body. Stand with me. Agree with me. We're all a part of God's body. It is God's will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive. You are important to me. I need you to survive. Simple song. Listen to the words again as we say, I need you, you need me, you need me. We're a part of God's body. All a part of God's I ask you to stand with me, agree with me. Agree with We're a part of God's body. All a part of God's See, it's God's will that everyone of them needs. And in needing, in that need, we now collectively pray. So you can turn to your neighbor and say, I pray for you as you pray for me. Everybody say it. I pray for you. You pray for me. I love you. I need you to survive. I won't harm you. Words from my mouth. With words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to say it like you mean it. Say, I pray for you. I pray for you pray for me. Say, I love you. I love you. And I need you. I need you to survive. Say, I won't harm you. With words from my mouth. Say, I love you. And I need you. Just to clap on the board. We're going to take it up there. I love you. God's will that every one of your needs, it will be supplied. You're important to me. I need you to survive.
So good morning. So the most intimidating thing about speaking at Unity Church of the Hills is having to follow celebration. So one more time for them. Thank you all very much. So I got asked to do this about 10 days ago. Asked if I was in town. I'm rarely in town. In fact, this is going to be the last Sunday I'm going to be here until the end of September. I'm speaking at Corpus and Temple and San Marcos, and then going to a Julia Cameron retreat in Northern California. That's a big one. Thank you, Henry, for that. And as we were preparing for this, Tammy tagged me and said, hey, are you available to speak on this Sunday? I said, yes, I am. And about 20 minutes later, Brian texted me and said, hey, I hear you're going to be speaking on the 30th. Do you have a talk topic yet? I just got asked a few minutes ago. I'm still marinating on that a little bit. But I started thinking from that text message, the first thing that came to my mind was this idea of spiritual independence. And so I spent about 24 hours thinking about that, spiritual independence, and what I thought and what I felt about that. And the reason why, obviously, is because Independence Day is coming up next week, so that was the natural thing for me to think about. But I started thinking that I don't really know that I actually believe in spiritual independence as much as I believe in spiritual interdependence, our connectivity and our unity with one another. And we just got through doing the 7-week series on the world religions. And one of the observations that I had in my own in going through all of those all together is that we share way more in common with these other traditions than our differences. Our differences are more artificial. And that at the end of the day, each one of these traditions has a mystical tradition component in their traditions. And especially at the mystical end is where we share a unity and a unified worldview that just goes beyond all of the other kinds of trappings and the stories and of the different religious traditions and so forth. So as I thought about that, and the next morning I woke up and this Into the Mystic came in my head, not just the Van Morrison song, but just that idea of Into the Mystic. And I remembered that a few years back I had delivered a talk at Unity in the heart of Austin down south under this title, Into the Mystic. And so I pulled it up on my YouTube page because I bookmarked it, and I re-listened to that talk. And as I was delivering that talk, I realized, oh, that was Independence Day weekend that I delivered that talk. So then I was like, oh, well, that seals it. So it's Into the Mystic, so I let everybody know it's Into the Mystic. And I told Tammy that story, but I didn't mention it to anybody else. And then last week when we were at the planning meeting, Kristen and Brian were on the phone, and Kristen starts talking about what she's going to talk about next week. I should back up and say that when I came into Brian's talk last week at the end of the series, at the end of the first service, I walked in, and one of the last things he said was, he brought up the spiritual independence thing. I was like, wow, like we're at a synchronicity, right? And then Kristen, not knowing that, she starts talking about her talk next week and says, oh, I think about something about independence, spiritual independence. And I was like, wow, isn't that something? But isn't that something? That is the synchronicity of the universe. That is a mystical experience where we are all engaged in the divine flow of divine ideas. And whether we realize it or not consciously in our rational minds, that we are all connected to the same source. It's the awareness of that source. It's the cultivation of a predisposition to be in alignment with that source. That is what a mystical practice is. A mystical practice is a willingness to have a direct experience of the divine without any intermediaries, any filters. You don't have to go through a minister. You don't have to go through a priest or a rabbi or anything else. You can literally sit down, be still, and know. And know that you are in the midst of that presence. So what exactly is a mystic? Well, there's different different definitions or different characteristics, I should say, that all of the world religions kind of hold in common. And the first one of those is the direct experience, which we just hinted at. That if you are willing to have a direct experience of the divine, you can do this anywhere. You can do it here. You can do it in traffic, which I have to practice quite often in traffic. I love you for cutting me off in traffic. You're a child of God. Please get safely where you're going. But it's that awareness that we are in the midst of the creative flow, the activity of life. And that to have a mystical experience is no more radical than simply attuning your attention to that ongoing cosmic flow. To be willing to be in the moment and present with your thoughts, the activity of your consciousness, and go, you know what? Whew, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in my life right now. I'm feeling very antsy and anxious and got some stresses and everything. But I can pause right now just for a few minutes. Just for a few minutes to simply be still and know that I am in the presence. That all of the power of the universe, all the creative cosmic power of the universe is available to me. All of the divine knowledge, all of the truth is available to me. It's available to you. We don't need intermediaries. In the first service, I talked about that I have a lot of books on my bookshelf by various mystics over the course of time, Meister Eckhart and Thich Nhat Hanh and Thomas Merton and different kinds of people. And I realized I've never read one of those books cover to cover. And I started thinking about that this week as I was preparing for that. And I said, why is that? I finished so many books. I read so many books. Why haven't I finished any of these books that the various mystics have written? And the immediate answer came to me is that because the lesson of the mystics is that you don't need a guru. You don't need a teacher. You need to be still and know and be in the silence, and that the same teacher that has taught all of them is available to you. Theirs is just a different form, a presentation of what they've learned. And it's valuable. I'm not saying it's not valuable. I'm not saying don't read those. I'm saying this is why I came to the conclusion that I haven't actually read and finished those books. I sampled them, but that the lesson at the end of the day is that I have accessibility, I should say, to the same one teacher that they have. You do too. And that one of the other definitions of mysticism is that it's an extreme practice. And yes, there are people who have taken on a lot of different kinds of forms that seem to be extreme to us. You got the whirling dervishes as an example. Or anyone who's, done any kind of hallucinogenic experiences and stuff like that throughout the course of time to bring about the mystical experience. Cloistering themselves away in an abbey somewhere, withdrawing from society. These are all extreme to some people's judgment. But I ask you, what is extreme about simply being still and knowing? What's radical about that? And why would anyone want to hide that truth from others? So I want to back up just a minute and tell you that the word mystic has derived through a series of things tracing back ultimately to a Greek word, that the verb form of the Greek word meant I conceal. That was the verb form, I conceal. So a mystic was someone who concealed. A derivative of that word is the word mystikos. And the word mystikos is an initiate. Someone being initiated into this body of mysterious knowledge. So a mystikos is an initiate into a body of knowledge that is intended for him to conceal, or her for that matter, because there's been plenty of female mystics throughout history as well. So what are they concealing exactly? What's the big deal? What's the truth that they're hiding, that they attempt to hide by these extreme practices? Well, let's try some things on. If you believe there is one power and one presence active in the universe and in your life, that there is no really opposing power to this one power and one presence, and that this power is a good power, you might be a mystic. if you believe that you were created in the image and the likeness of this power and presence, and that you are intended to be a co-creator of this experience in creation, you might be a mystic. If you believe that you can connect with this divine presence and power in silent prayer and meditation, you might be a mystic. Now notice the trend here, like I'm just clocking the unity principles, right? So chances are good that if you're in this room and you've been coming to unity for any amount of time, you're probably a mystic. You're probably a mystic, because one of the things is that direct experience. Now, over the course of the time, the definition for a mystic evolved into where they would say these were extreme practices, as I mentioned. And that's been used a lot to discourage people from actually having a direct experience of God through the mystical practices, because they seemed extreme. They seemed part of the lunatic fringe. And that worked really well for the established organized religions to keep people coming into the front doors of organized religion, because what if we all found out that we just need to have a direct experience of God by being still and knowing that we're in the power and the presence? Wouldn't it be a challenge to kind of keep people in line at that point in time if everyone knew that they didn't need an intermediary, they didn't need an authority figure to bless their experience of the divine? That's what the mystical tradition did over the course of time. Now, you go back around the fall of Constantinople, which I think was somewhere roughly 1450, 1453, somewhere along that ballpark. That marked the end of the Roman Empire, sort of officially. And it had held sway for about 1,500 years. About 17 years before that end, before that official end, Gutenberg invented the printing press. And guess what they started printing up? Bibles. This body of knowledge began to be available to individuals, whereas before it was sort of held within the organized religions and so forth, sort of dispensed out, in whatever, matter they wanted to see. But once the Bible was starting to be printed, people could get access to them and read it for themselves and start having a direct experience. Well, this led to all kinds of changes, right? We had the Renaissance period, which was a rebirth of all this ancient wisdom. That led to a period of enlightenment, the age of enlightenment. And finally, an age of reason, where we started reasoning. And then the Romantic period, the 1800s, we started getting into the time when new thought and unity and everything started rising up out of this romantic period, this idea of the romantic thing where the individual could have the direct experience of God. And so unity and other new thought traditions that grew up in the 19th century began to honor the individual and the individual's right to have a direct experience of the divine without an intermediary, without some sort of formality attached to it. This was huge. This was huge. That Charles Fillmore, growing up in this environment and everything, progressing through the 19th century and everything, the unity principles that we just articulated for ourselves a moment ago, I don't think they came formally into being until sometime in the 1980s. Yeah, Connie, one of his descendants, had actually written and articulated the 5 principles that for almost 100 years, unity had operated without articulating the principles that we believe. There was the knowledge was out there, but no one had brought it together in a concise way. And how prescient of her that when she articulated these things, that she's basically articulating the mystic experience. Because we insist upon a direct experience of the divine. How do we know this to be true? We can go back to our teacher, Jesus, and among the things that he said was, "I and the Father are one." You could append that statement to say, "You and the Father are one as well." How do we know this? Because Jesus said, what? What I can do, you can do. He didn't tell us, he didn't teach us that he has a special dispensation, an authoritative certificate that says he's the only Son of God. He didn't say that, he didn't teach it. Others have said that about him, but he didn't. What I can do, you can do. And if I and the Father are one, you and the Father are one as well. It doesn't get more intimate than that, right? So there's no place I can be, there's no place I can go, there's no place you can be or any place you can go where you are ever out of the presence of the divine. Being aware of that sets you up to be in the midst of a mystical experience, because that's the purpose, or that's one of the characteristics of a mystical experience, a direct experience of the divine. You can do this in your garden, when you're communing with nature and helping plant life and so forth to grow. And in fact, if you trace mystical origins back before the church, even way back in time, and the pagan rituals and everything, that nature was the thing. Nature was how they communed with the divine. So even those pagan rituals and everything that have been sort of denigrated over the course of time by the church, they were actually a mystical experience, being right in the process of co-creating the experience with the same divine principles that are available to everyone. So as we get into the 1800s and unity and new thought and everything start getting traction and everything, the definition of a mystic was amended again. Right? So we're going to deal with this mysterious knowledge that involves some extreme practices, but for the purpose of human transformation, for the purpose of your individual transformation. That's what these divine principles are for. That's what they're intended to be used for and utilized for, is to facilitate your own awakening, your own growth into your own spiritual fulfillment. Each one of us has the Christ template within us. And that's the idea, the divine idea of perfection realized. We have, as the affirmation said, we have inexhaustible potential. Inexhaustible potential. Infinite. We have more potential than we will actually ever express. So anytime we're feeling less than, or that we don't have the power to overcome something, remember, you have an infinite capacity of creative potential, an inexhaustible supply. Wow. You do realize that you can never actually fully achieve an inexhaustible potential. There's always more that you can express. So if you're feeling weighed down by the circumstances of life, and you remember, you bring this back into your awareness, like, oh wow, I'm a child of God. I was created in the image and likeness of the Christ potential. I have that within me. And if I have that potential within me, there's really nothing that can stand against me. There's nothing that can hold me down, at least for very long. The secret is I need to be still and know. Be willing to be still and sit in that silence. It's not a thinking activity. It's not a thinking activity. It's a listening activity. So that I must get into the silence so that I can hear. I shut down all the distractions. I get as neutral as I can, as blank as I can. And then I listen. And all this ecstatic experience, what they call ecstasy, right? It's not like all joy and just out of bounds delirium and stuff like that. That's not what it's for. It's a transformative experience that is ineffable, meaning that you have this transcendent experience and it's hard to put it into words. And then as you try, man, I just had this great experience and I got to tell you about it. And I start trying to find some words to get an entry point into it. As soon as I try to jump off into an entry point, I'm already limiting the experience. I can't quite explain to you how great this is. But I know it's great. But it's like looking at the sun. You can only peek at it for just a moment straight on. You better look away real quick because it'll burn, it'll turn you blind. It'll literally, it's too bright, there's too much. We are not intended to be in an ecstatic experience full time. It's those moments of ecstasy where we get downloaded divine information, divine guidance, and we can glimpse at it and go, oh wow, look at that. I got to tell somebody about this. And as you're figuring out who you're going to call, you're forgetting exactly what happened. Because you're on to the next moment, because you can't stay in an ecstatic experience. But the ecstatic experience was intended to transform your understanding, to transform your life. And that is what a mystical experience is about. And that you can have anywhere. You don't need an intermediary. You don't need a filter. You don't need an authority figure. You just need to be still and know. So as we bring this message to a close, I want to invite everybody to forget everything I just said. Shake it all off. Shake it all off. And bring yourself present to your spot right where you sit right now. If you need to adjust yourself to feel a little more comfortable, that's okay. Just do what you need to do to get yourself anchored right here, right now, in this very room, at this moment in time. Feel your presence in the seat. And allow your imagination just for a moment to widen up its bandwidth and enfold everyone else that's in this room right into your experience, that we're all having a communal, mystical experience right now, an experience of the divine, a direct experience of the one power and one presence that is activating and animating our lives. We know that this mystical experience, there's nothing radical about it. We're just being still and knowing. And that in this space of listening, we will hear the divine message that is intended for us right here, right now, that has the potential to transform our lives, beginning today. We don't even have to wait, for the answers that we need are already present. All we need to do is attune our attention, to open our hearts and our minds, to have a willingness to follow through on the divine guidance that is ours. It's beyond words. We have nothing else to say but thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, living, loving Spirit, for all that is available to us. And so we pray in the name and the nature of Jesus the Christ, and so it is. And so we allow it to be. Amen. Namaste.
Thanks for joining us today. And if you like the message, we invite you to like it, share it, and please subscribe.
We are a New Thought church where lives are transformed. So come on, check us out at unityhills.org.
Namaste.